Hi everyone. I wanted to record a video about some things that have been on my mind for a while. The content of this video is likely to be of most interest to Christians, but it may be of interest to others as well. I'd like to start by sharing some verses from the Bible that I think have something in common with each other. The first is Psalms chapter 24 verse 1, which says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." Next is Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 14. "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Then John chapter 1 verse 3, which is, "Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." Mark chapter 16 verse 15 says, "He said to them, 'Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation.'" Colossians chapter 1 verses 19 and 20 says, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." And finally, from right at the end of the Bible, we have Revelation chapter 21 verse 5a, where Jesus is speaking after his return to the earth, which is, "He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.'" I'm wondering if you've spotted the pattern in these verses and seen what they have in common. The eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that they all talk about all things, all creation, or everything. For me, this pattern is significant and tells us something important. So, to summarize the pattern in these verses and placing them in a more chronological order, we can see that all things were made by God, all things belong to God. Jesus instructed his disciples to proclaim the gospel to all things. God has reconciled all things to himself. He will reveal his glory to all things, and when Jesus returns, he will make all things new. I do a lot of project work, which often starts with a scoping exercise where we try to define the scope of the project as clearly as possible to avoid doing things that don't deliver the project's goals. I think these verses tell us something about the scope of God's interests and activity in the world. God's scope appears to be everything, and what that means has been on my mind for a while. If God's scope is all things, then I find it difficult to believe that the most important thing to God about your life is where you are on a Sunday morning. And yet you might be forgiven for thinking that this is the case, given how much focus Christians give to Sunday morning services. When we meet another Christian, one of the first questions we often ask is, "Where do you go to church?" I heard a story from a church leader who went to a conference for church leaders, and in the queue for coffee, one delegate asked another how their church was going, to which they responded that things were good, as attendance was up. Another church leader chipped in, saying he was pleased because they had recently increased their regular donations. At that point, a third church leader spoke up, saying they were excited to be starting a building project and were looking forward to the improvements that it would make. Throughout the conversation, another church leader waited quietly for his coffee, without getting involved in the conversation. The other church leaders turned to him and asked him, "So what about you? How's your church going?" "I'm actually really pleased with our progress," he said. "Oh yes?" he was asked by the other leaders, expecting to tell them about great attendance or donations. "Well, the crime rate in our town has gone down. The economy is improving with several new businesses moving in and employing people. School attendance has gone up and fewer people are getting divorced. So I think we must be doing something right." The church leader who shared the anecdote with me explained that he suddenly realised that his metrics might have been a bit off, and he felt a bit less complacent about what he'd been doing. Church is important, and being part of a Christian fellowship is vital for all believers. But if the scope of God's work is all the world, or all things, or just everything, then simply having fuller churches on a Sunday can't fulfill God's purposes, at least not on its own. What it means is that in every area of your life, God is interested in what is happening. He has a plan and wants to work with and through you to bring the knowledge of his glory to reconcile those areas of your life to him. The difficult situations in your life, those parts of your life that are a joy and a source of strength, the parts of your life that you treasure the most, those parts of your life in which you have hoped for progress and change for many years, the parts of your life that are mundane and routine, all are of interest to God. In all, God wants to make himself known, and in all, God wants to bring every person, every situation, and every aspect of his creation into his presence. The only outcome that will fulfill the scope of God's work is the total transformation of everything in all creation. And we have the promise that this will happen when Jesus returns. Until then, God is seeking to transform the parts of the world that each one of us as believers are in contact with, through his presence at work in and through us. So, my challenge and encouragement to you is to ask, how is God seeking to transform your place of work, your family environment, your children's schools, the charity where you volunteer, or even the lives of your friends, family and neighbours, and others with whom you are in contact? I believe God will meet you, lead you and guide you as you engage with him in this way.